So we're now recording. I'm going to ask everybody, please mute your line when you come on. I will be keeping track and muting everybody, but it's very helpful to have everybody mute the line. We're up to 30, which is great. Okay, we're going to get started. I am so thrilled that Dr. Kate Fiske agreed to join us this evening to talk about a topic that's very important during this time of COVID, and that is about parent stress and some strategies that parents can employ themselves, and also for us as clinicians to think about helping parents to employ. I've been a fan of Kate's work for a very long time. She is the Director of Family Support Services at Douglas Developmental Disabilities Center. She's also the Director of Academic Training at Rutgers University and Douglas Developmental Disability Center. She's also the author of a well-known book called Autism in the Family, which I highly recommend that you pick up. And I refer to it frequently in my talks that I give on compassion, because Kate is one of the few people who really talk about the complexity of families and the importance of us seeing and understanding the struggles that families go through, the unique struggles that families go through. So I really encourage you to pick it up. I'm going to now turn my camera off and let Kate Fiske take it away. So thank you all for joining.
Thank you, Bridget. It is so nice to be able to have the opportunity to do this talk and to share these thoughts with you. I want to thank Bridget and Alpine Learning Group for really recognizing this as a really important topic during this time. It's always an important topic, but what we've been experiencing over the past few months has certainly thrown a wrinkle in things, to say the least. I want to start out, and Bridget referenced my book, and I really want to emphasize first and foremost that what we are experiencing during the COVID pandemic is something that is affecting everyone. So regardless of whether you have children or not, regardless of whether you have a child with autism or not, there are a lot of common experiences that we're sharing during this time, and a lot of common stresses. But even between people who have children at home and people who have children with autism at home, there are some pretty significant differences. And that just goes down to the basic level of stress that a lot of parents will experience related to having a child with autism. And Bridget referenced my book, and a lot of that is based on really getting professionals to recognize how the challenges, the unique challenges that parents of children with autism face. And we know, based on research, that parents who do have a child with autism at home experience a different level of stress. They experience a lot of very complex emotions related to raising a child with autism. And those are on a daily basis. And it is a constant experience that they have. So that, coupled with the experience of the COVID pandemic, has thrust you all into a very unique situation. The other thing that I want to say, because I know that there are a number of parents of children with autism on the call, on this webinar, but there are also a number of professionals, and I was really glad to see that as I scrolled through, I recognized a few of the names there. And so I want to say that I'm very glad that you're here. And that you're listening in, because I think that it is going to be very helpful, first off, for you to be able to recognize kind of what the stressors are for parents during this time, so that as you're working with them, you're going to be able to notice those, maybe sometimes take a step back because you can see that those stressors are very present. But I think it's also well within your place in some cases to be able to step forward and say, I'm noticing that this is something that's a problem for you, or you're having trouble here. Let me offer you a couple strategies that might help. And then finally, it's all of these things, again, we're all experiencing similar stressors in some ways. And so some of the strategies that I'm offering today are going to be useful for anyone. And believe me, I'm going to be sitting here taking in my own words. I am not a parent of a child with autism. I do have 3 young children. And so definitely a lot of the parenting stress that I'll be talking about today, I'm directing a lot of those same, strategies at myself and trying to kind of work through those things. And so those are just a couple things that I wanted to note. And I also want to point out that there are, in this talk, I'm going to be throwing you a lot of different strategies, and I do not expect that you're going to do them all. I don't expect that all of them are going to work, but they're all of the strategies that you have at your disposal that you could try, that you could see whether they are effective, and just gives you the options that you have to work through some of what it is that you're experiencing. So the first thing I'm going to do, and it's going to seem a little strange, is to kind of go through the stressors that you have as parents of children with autism during this time. And you might be thinking, why is she going to list these off? I know all of these stressors, but I want to do this because I want to validate the fact that these stressors are real, and that the combination of the stressors is pretty remarkable when you see them all lined up. And I sat and kind of just brainstormed all of the different ways that this COVID pandemic is affecting families, all families. But then if you look at this graphic, you can see these little puzzle pieces floating through, and there are definitely unique contributors of having a child with autism that will in some ways strengthen the impact of what it is that we're experiencing here. So at the top of the list, you see concern for health and well-being, right? And so that comes as no surprise in this current COVID time, that families are going to be much more aware and nervous and worried about the health of their own health, the health of their children, the health of extended family, and being very cautious about what it is that they can and can't do. And I think now in New Jersey, at least, we're getting, kind of these increased opportunities to kind of get out and enjoy the world a little bit more. And with that comes a lot of anxiety as families wonder what is the right thing to do. And my family is wondering the same thing. And I think with kind of this concern for health, it's really important to recognize the mental and emotional toll that that's going to take on families just at kind of a baseline level, because everything, and absolutely everything, is harder now to think through the logistics. A very trite example is that the other day I had to do kind of this loop errand, and I had all 3 of the kids in the car. And as I was coming back, I was like, it would be a really nice treat for them because they've been so good to stop and grab some French fries at a drive-through. And I had all of these decisions that I had to make in the process. I had to think about whether I should be going into the restaurant. I can't go into the restaurant. I've got all of the kids in the car, but I can't leave them in the car because I can't leave my kids alone. And so I've got to go through the drive-through, but do I have a mask to go through the drive-through in? And so all of these different situations kind of run through your head that make a decision that is, should I stop for French fries or should I not stop for French fries, suddenly so much more complicated. And that is, again, a very trite example because there are a lot of decisions that we have to make that are a lot more fraught than that. And so it really just kind of demonstrates how much more we have to think through all of these things. And also kind of the emotional impact and the relational impact of some of the decisions that we're going to have to make over the next couple months. I have to recognize the impact of recent national events on families and practitioners. The murder of George Floyd, the related protests and riots that have been going on in our country have had a tremendous toll on families. I can't imagine the grief and the anger and the sadness that a lot of people, but none more so than Black families that we're working with, Black practitioners in our field, are experiencing during this time. And I think it's really important for us to recognize as practitioners the toll that that will take. And so if you are working with a family of color, really noticing that this is something that could very much impact them. And this is not a run-of-the-mill day in these times. And so I wanted to really point that out and acknowledge that, because that is a considerable stressor for many. With that, and also related to COVID, a lot of families are going to be experiencing grief. It might be because they lost somebody to COVID. And, you know, for those of you who have lost a friend or family member, I'm incredibly sorry. This pandemic is unsparing, and it has been, you know, I've lost people as well. And I think it's really important for us to recognize that impact. In kind of a normative way that we think about grief, but I think it's also important for all of us to, even within ourselves, recognize that we're going to be grieving a lot of other things too. And so it is not necessarily the loss of a person that you might grieve for. You might grieve for the loss of your alone time, the loss of a schedule, loss of time in a job. You might be grieving the loss of a job if you've lost your job. You might be grieving small milestones that your child might have accomplished in the last few months of the school year that they won't accomplish now. And so really recognizing that some of the emotions we are experiencing are grief, and being aware of that as practitioners when we're working with families. Obviously, there have been considerable shifts for families in terms of the balance that we're striking. So there are going to be employment changes. As I mentioned, some people have lost their jobs, and that's going to be an incredible financial impact. And some people can be thankful that they still have their jobs, but that means that they're still potentially, especially if they're parents, balancing their role as an employee and now a caregiver and a teacher. And I mention those two things separately because you are doing both things. You were once just a caregiver, but now you're a caregiver and a teacher. And those are not two roles that people are meant to hold. And so when you're being an employer or an employee and a teacher and a caregiver, that's a lot for one person to take on. And you're trying to figure out what that balance looks like. And I know all of you are probably going to heroic measures to try and be both. I will say that I have definitely seen the wee hours of the morning much more than I used to, just because those are the times that I can get work done, right, is when my children are sleeping. And so I'm sure that many of you are doing the same thing. And that's going to take an emotional or a practical toll, but also just it will impact your overall level of fatigue, as I'll talk about in a moment. With taking on the role of teacher for your child, if you have a child with autism, you are not just any old teacher. You are a special education teacher, and that carries with it so much more than just being a teacher. It is it's a very unique specialty, you know, kind of having the training to work with children with autism. You've had it, you have that training, you have a child with autism, but using the procedures that we use to teach your children is something that might be new for you. And the intensity of what it is that you're being asked to do may be new for you. And I imagine just, you know, I've taken on the role of teacher, and I often think of families who have had to take on that role of a special education teacher, implementing maybe ABA, maybe other strategies at home, which can be very difficult, especially for children who have a hard time with a lot of these skills and have difficulty making progress. And so with that comes fears about your child's progress and fears about whether you're doing enough. Whether you are working hard enough, whether you're putting in enough time, whether you're doing it as you're supposed to be doing it. And does that mean that it's holding up your child? And also considering these disruptions to schedules that a lot of families are experiencing now. We all have experienced disrupted schedules. You don't necessarily get the same time alone that you used to. But for parents of children with autism, it has more of an impact because we know how much these children rely on schedules and routines and favorite places. And with the loss of those things, it's going to have a tremendous impact. And I think for parents of children with autism who are accustomed to having their children go to school, right? And that doesn't mean that they're home doing nothing. I absolutely understand that. But you have time where your child is at school and you are doing all of the other things that need to be done in your life. And so that is an enormous disruption for you as well. And that's going to have a tremendous impact on your well-being. Balancing other household needs, balancing the needs of other family members in the home if you have other children. All of these things are going to result in a lot of fatigue. right? Because this has been chronic. This has been going on for 4 months now. Those are you who are looking ahead to extended school year. And what does this mean? Is my school going to be open? Am I going to be the teacher for my child for another 2 or 3 months as we move through the summer? It seems like it is never ending. And if you're not sleeping well, if you're not getting the breaks during the day that you are accustomed to getting, even if they're not breaks, they're just time where you're able to focus on one thing instead of splitting your time across so many, that's going to really take a toll on you. I have to mention unique roles. Families who have essential employees who have had to report to work throughout this whole time. Families who have single parents who are caring for their children entirely on their own and don't have other caregivers to help jump in. That's going to be a very different situation and definitely contribute to the stress that you experience and the emotions that you experience during this time. And with all of this, really kind of summing up what it is that you have experienced, with it all, there's like this lack of control and this complete uncertainty, right? There is very little we can do to change what is happening right now with the pandemic, right? We're just kind of lying in wait to see what happens next. We can wear our masks, we can keep ourselves safe. We can hope that by wearing masks, we're reducing numbers and we'll be able to get out there faster, but we don't know. We don't know what the summer will look like. We don't know what the school year will look like next year. And I know that there is a lot of fear and anxiety from a lot of families and parents related to that. There is for me too. And so again, to summarize, I'm going through this list and I'm sure you're saying, why is she telling me all of this? I know all of this. But I think it's really important to really show you how much there is and to really validate for you that this is a lot. And what I want to say is that all of this list here, this is kind of impossible. And I have to kind of remind myself of that sometimes, that what we're asking parents to do right now, working, caring for children, teaching children, keeping up with the house, trying to keep everybody safe, and dealing with all of your emotions at the same time, that is impossible. And it is incredibly hard and difficult to do. And there is a reason that you're feeling so out of control. There is a reason that you're not feeling okay. And so the first thing that I want to tell you is to practice self-kindness, to be kind to yourself, because this is not a usual circumstance. This is not something where anybody expects you to be succeeding in every area. And I think it's really helpful for you to back up and think about, what would your best friend tell you in this situation? Or if you had a friend who came to you and told you, this is all the stuff that I'm dealing with right now, what would you tell that person, right? Step back for a moment. And it's likely that you would tell yourself, let some things go. Let some things go. Give yourself a break. You can't do all of these things. You can't do all of these things well. So if you're expecting perfection from yourself, that is going to be something that is going to be very difficult to achieve. And so again, I think recognizing that it's okay to not be okay, because none of us are okay right now. This is not okay. And we really have to know that this is part of humanity, right? This is being human, is not being okay with this situation. You can see the asterisks here. There was an article that was recently published in Behavior Analysis in Practice by Coyne and colleagues, looking at helping parents with what they call psychological flexibility, which is drawn from acceptance and commitment therapy during this time. And they have some really nice practical suggestions for practitioners in helping parents. And so I've highlighted a couple of their questions throughout in their quotes. So, this is one: it's okay to not be okay. But they have this quote as well: we are all capable of amazing, heroic things, and we all make mistakes and struggle. We are all vulnerable and imperfect. And I want to say that there is no doubt that all of you are doing amazing, heroic things right now. And it might not feel, you're not, a first responder, you're not an essential employee, you're not there on the front lines, but you have a role in helping your child we're going to be asking so much of you. And the things that you're doing and managing, it might feel like you're failing, but you're really doing amazing things. And it's okay to be imperfect. And I think that really kind of allowing yourself that self-kindness to recognize that is going to be important. For practitioners who are here, this is the reference. Please, take and I know Bridget is recording this, but you can also take a screenshot or take a picture of this reference. Because it's an excellent article in behavior analysis and practice, and has some really nice suggestions for practitioners and just in terms of guiding parents through this time using the principles from acceptance and commitment therapy. So definitely check out this article. So early in the COVID pandemic, I attended a webinar just in terms of self-care and helping with families during this time. And the speaker had said, the first thing to do is to check in with families, with yourself, like, am I safe? Are they safe? Are they healthy? These are the kind of first line questions that you're going to check in on. But then the next thing is evaluating values for yourself and for these families. And I think that for all of you, for me, that these values have likely changed in the past 3 or 4 months. I would have said 4 months ago that I placed a lot of value on being very productive at work and being there for all of my graduate students. I oversee a lot of graduate students, making sure that my children are achieving well at school, right? So those are some of the values, and I would definitely say that since this pandemic has started, those have shifted. And the things that I have prioritized align with my new, more present values, right? And so one of them remains being there for my graduate students. That is something that is incredibly important to me, and I spend a lot of time really focusing on and supporting them during this time instead of kind of the productivity piece, right? That's been very important to me. But also for my children, and this is going to be different for everyone, there's been much more focus for me on having them be safe, feel safe, be healthy, feel loved. These are the important things. And I stray away from those values. I definitely do. There are times where we have kind of these epic, screaming matches in our house, and I've got to kind of recenter myself and say, what are the values, right? We're arguing over homework, and we don't need to argue over homework because that's not the value right now, right? It is, about everybody feeling safe and loved. And so really kind of moving myself back. And so I want you to think about that, right? Think through some of these questions. What do I want this time to be about? Who do I want to be in this? What do I want this to mean for my child? And what kind of parent do I want to have been? So as you look back, what kind of parent do you want to have been during this time? And I think that these questions can be tough. And I think one of these questions can be tough is because you might answer these questions in your head and then say, but I've already failed, right? I raise my voice at my kids all the time. I'm getting frustrated. I'm angry. I cry. It's kind of recognizing all of these ways that you haven't been able to do those things. And so I want to talk through kind of ways that you can move towards your values. And one of the really important things to think about is that you have to start from where you are. And that's another item that was pulled from a webinar that Coyne and Gould had done just recently. You have to, everything that's happened before, as you kind of think about how to move forward, let's just put that in the past right now. Starting from now, start from where you are, moving forward, let's figure out how to move towards your values. And a lot of the things that I'll talk about today will help you do that. Recognize that small steps are movement. It is going to be impossible to say, I'm going to be a better parent, right? That's not a good way to kind of create this value or kind of this goal, because it's going to be impossible to kind of reach this ideal model of parenthood that you have. But there are small things that you can do, right? I'm going to spend 10 minutes with my child just sitting and playing with them. And that might be something that's an achievable goal that you might be able to do. Or you might say, I'm going to exercise, and have this whole exercise regimen. And it's like, that might be an impossible thing to work towards right now. But what you can do is just get up and move around a little bit more. And I'll talk about that in a moment. Just kind of schedule in small ways that you can move towards your goals. So those small steps, those small little things that you choose to do in your day are movement towards your goals. Some of the things that I'm going to talk about are going to require coordination with others. And so it's important to, if you are a caregiver who has another partner at home, you might have to coordinate with that person to figure out how to find the time to do some of these things. I've also worked hard to identify things that can be done without having to take time alone. And so I think that that is, especially for those who are single parenting, trying to fit those things in. But it might be helpful to have conversations about the fact that you need to find this time, or you need to try something different to help your mental health. And so it can be good to have this conversation. And I think it's also helpful to get permission. And I don't mean to get permission from your partner or from other family members who might be able to provide help. It's getting permission from yourself to do the things that you need to do. And why I think it's important to say this is because often as parents, there is always something else that can be done during a period of time that we could take for ourselves. This happens to me. I might have suddenly, 5 minutes where I have a little chunk of time that I can do something. And I'm like, oh, but I should be spending time with this kid, or I really need to reply to that email, or I really need to clean the bathroom because I haven't done it forever. All of these things crop up, and it is really hard to give myself permission to just sit and do something for myself. And so you might really need to think about that and think about how you give yourself permission during that time. Okay. So I want to start by thinking about basic needs. And these are the things that should really be part of your day already. I'm not asking you to add anything to your day. It's about figuring out how to tweak what it is that you're already doing and that you should already be doing to make yourself more comfortable. And so you can see this quote here: what can I do that would make me 10% more comfortable? So thinking today, I'm incredibly stressed, I'm incredibly anxious, I'm worried. There are all of these different thoughts that are going through my head. What could I do that would make me feel 10% more comfortable? And identify what that might be. And it might be one of these things. It might be another strategy that I talk about in a little bit. But it'll just give you some initial ideas to kind of, come up with a direction in terms of how you're going to take care of yourself. So here are some of these basic needs that you could think through. So one of them is just eating, and it sounds so basic. It really does. But for parents, this is often something that just falls by the wayside. I did this to myself the other day. I was, running around doing things, and my kids needed to eat. So I ran into the kitchen and I made all their sandwiches and all their lunches. And then I rushed back to what it was that I was doing. And I told myself, stop, go back and make yourself a sandwich. It is not going to take that much more time to make yourself a sandwich and eat it while you do something. And it was something that I tend to neglect and forget about until much later of the day. And so I did. I made myself a sandwich, came back, but that is something that's really important because it is literally the basic fuel that you need. Make sure that you're eating, especially if you're feeding your kids. Take some time to eat when you're feeding your kids. Make sure that you're drinking throughout the day. Sleeping is a loaded area. It really is. And I recognize for parents of children with autism, this is something that is going to be potentially more difficult. If you have children with dysregulated sleep patterns, sleeping is going to be something that is a little bit more difficult for you to regulate yourself. Saying, I'm going to go to bed every night at 10 o'clock and wake up at 7 o'clock, that's not going to happen. It really might not happen. And it certainly doesn't happen for me. And also because if you have children who do sleep well, that is often the only time that you can get the things done that you need to get done. And so for many parents, again, those regular sleep hours are not totally feasible. But what I do want you to do is make sure that you're keeping an eye on your fatigue level. And I recognize this myself. I know kind of the signs of when I'm really tired, and I do schedule in time to just get to bed a little bit earlier to make sure that I give myself more time to sleep and catch up on that when I can. And this is one of those things that it might require a conversation with a partner or someone who can help you with, if you have a child who's up, who can be aware and help provide care for that child during that time so you can get that sleep. So this third bullet, it was a conscious decision for me to put movement and not exercise. Exercise, I think for a lot of parents, results, saying that they need to exercise just creates this immediate sense of failure because it's the first thing that goes for a lot of parents, and it's not a priority. And so saying that you've got to add exercise to your list of things that you have to do, that huge list of things that you have to do, it's not setting you up for success. Movement, however, you can do. And I think especially during this time where we are, in this pandemic, we're, just easing out of kind of this quarantine lifestyle. But it's a good reminder to get movement, and it can be done in a lot of different ways. It can be done taking a walk by yourself. You can take a walk with your children. You can do YouTube exercise videos with your kids. Cosmic Kids Yoga is a great one. My kids like to watch Just Dance videos on YouTube, and we'll dance along to those. Some of those are going to be important things that you can just incorporate into your day, things that your kids already really enjoy doing. If your kid has a trampoline and they like to jump on it with them. Just get moving, because that's going to have a big impact. And we know from research that has a big impact on well-being. And then the last one I think is going to feel the least possible for a lot of parents is this time for yourself. And I really want to emphasize that this does not have to be a lot of time. It can be a small bit just for you to kind of focus on yourself, think about yourself. I just wrote an article for the Rutgers Center for Adult Autism Services newsletter, which I'll share a link to later, on finding time for yourself. How do you find time for yourself? And one of the big things is knowing what you would do with that time. What would you do during that time to take care of yourself? And again, I'll kind of find those little moments in the day where suddenly, and that's how it happens with parents, it's like suddenly you have time to yourself, and you weren't predicting it and you didn't know it was going to happen, but here it is. And I freeze. I don't know what to do, because I'm so used to doing everything. And so I think it's really helpful to kind of have a list of the things that you could do during that time, rather than just scroll through Facebook, because that tends to be my default when I suddenly have a moment. It's like, oh, I guess I'll check the internet. But have things that you would like to do. If you had 10 minutes, what would you do for yourself? And it can be different things for different people. You might read, you might go for a walk. You might color, like there are a lot of different things that people have that they enjoy that are easy to pick up and do right this second. And so identifying what those activities are, scheduling them is going to be difficult. I totally understand as parents, but finding times where it might be more likely that you can grab that time. It's not going to be necessarily every day, and it's okay that it's not every day, but if every, once or twice a week you can grab that time, that can be helpful. So my husband gets up and first thing he goes for a walk by himself, and I've got the kids, and then right after I get them to bed, and again, this doesn't happen every day because bedtime doesn't always go the way anybody planned, but when it does, then I'll slip out and I'll take a walk by myself. And it is a good, it's 5 to 10 minutes. It's very quick, but it is often the only time that I see to myself for that, for the whole day. And during that time, I want you to consider trying mindfulness. And mindfulness might seem like a little bit of an it phrase these days, or an it term. Many of you might have heard about mindfulness. It does have research backing its efficacy or an effectiveness in reducing stress, improving well-being, and it does among parents of children with autism. And it can seem a little bit overwhelming sometimes. And so I just want to share the part about mindfulness that I think is most helpful and most digestible for families. And I think that is just being in the moment. And this, if you think about taking a walk, right, and going for a walk, it is highly likely that you're doing that, and while you're walking, you're time traveling. Your head is in a million different directions. You're thinking about what you haven't been able to accomplish, what you still need to do, all of the what ifs that might be coming up. And you are a million miles away, but you're not where you are right now, which is taking this walk. And so during my walks, I try to focus on visual and sounds, right? So I notice a lot of the flowers that I pass as I'm taking my walk. I listen to the sounds of the birds. I listen to the sound of traffic that's passing by, and really focus on those things. And my mind wanders again, and I just notice that my mind has wandered, and I just refocus myself back on what it is that I'm doing. I don't get mad at myself that my mind has wandered, because that's totally human. That's, what our brain has been trained to do. But I refocus myself on the sights and sounds. And you can do this in so many different ways. It doesn't have to be something where you've set aside 10 minutes of your day. You can do this at any point during your day. There's a lot of breathing exercises, mindful breathing. You can do it while walking. You can do it while eating. You're drinking your coffee in the morning and you're just focused on what that coffee smells like, what it tastes like, listening to music. I put coloring here. If you have a child who colors, this can be a really great way to sit down with them and do an activity and keep them occupied, but also allow yourself to be mindful. I do have a 4-year-old who colors, and so while I'm coloring with her, I just focus on the picture. I focus on what it is that I'm coloring, whether I'm in the lines, like that is what I'm focused on, and I'm not letting my mind wander. And if it does, I'm just bringing it back to what I'm doing. But also you can be mindful while you're playing and being with your child. Just notice what your child is doing. Notice the way that they look, the sounds that they're making, what they might be saying. There are a lot of different ways that you can focus on your child and just their actions without being judgmental about how it is, what it is that they are or aren't doing. It's just focusing on them. So I definitely encourage you, it goes beyond the scope of this talk to kind of get into all of the different practices of mindfulness, but there's some really good resources, and here are 2 of them. So Greater Good Science Center at UC Berkeley is a great website that offers a lot of different strategies that you can use and exercises you can use to guide you through mindfulness. But then also the Smiling Mind app is an app that's available that offers a range of exercises for kids, for adults, for parents, short exercises, long exercises, depending on how much time you have. That can be very helpful in just finding this time to be present during the day, which again has been shown to be very helpful for a lot of individuals, including parents of children with autism. So I'm going to touch on positivity, and we do know that positivity can have a big impact on mental health. The research has shown this, and people who make more positive comments during the day or have more positive thoughts about their child, it predicts how they feel on subsequent days. There is a big caveat to this, and I'll talk about it in a moment. But here are just a couple strategies that you might use if you're looking to kind of inject some of that positivity in your day. One of those is grateful journals. And this does not, sometimes people are like, I can't keep a journal. And this is like a piece of paper next to your bed that you can scrawl some words on before you go. It doesn't need to look pretty. Your penmanship doesn't need to be beautiful. Journals kind of have this like daunting kind of approach sometimes in terms of how detailed you need to be, but this is not what this is. It's just thinking about what are the 3 things that I'm grateful for that happened today, and be as detailed as possible about what it was that they were. And I think here it's really important to say that small moments make a big difference. And so when you're writing in your grateful journal, when you're thinking of the things that you're grateful for, it doesn't need to be these huge things that have happened. It can be really small moments and activities that you did during the course of the day that you were really grateful for. And a nice example of this, and again, kind of speaking from my own experiences, is that one of the things that I get frustrated by is that I don't make the time, and I don't necessarily kind of have the energy to push in to get my kids out for these big trips. And I know families, in person on Facebook are doing hikes and biking, and they're doing all of these activities. And we just haven't been able to get there yet. I haven't been able to get there. I definitely, my husband, I'm like, oh, I should have gone hiking today. It's a beautiful day and I should have done that, right? The should have, could have. And then the other day, somebody asked my 4-year-old what was the best thing that she'd done recently. And she said, well, we had dinner in our backyard. And my husband and I looked at each other because that was such a small blip for us. But it was so big for her, and it was so special for her. And it really shows that those small moments can make a big difference. It doesn't have to be these grand gestures, these grand plans. It can be these small things that become the positive moments in your day. And so recognizing that. Also thinking about the impact that your language has just in terms of how you're thinking about things. And one of the tools that I find most helpful is rephrasing things, because and all of us and all of you certainly have this list of all of the things that you have to get done during the day, right? I have to run sessions, I have to do my work, I have to clean the house. You have all of this huge, and so sometimes it can be helpful to reframe by changing it from I have to I get to. And so, what that might be, what it might look like is, oh, I have to spend time with my kid helping them do their schoolwork. And instead, it changes to I get to spend that time with my kid, right? And so, reframing that way has a much more positive spin and can help you feel better, believe it or not, about the way that you look at that situation, and it kind of give you more positivity. And I think all of these kind of these positive thoughts that you have are going to move you towards the values that you're looking to do, that you're looking to achieve, right? Spending time with my kid is part of my value in terms of making her feel supported and loved and safe during this time, right? And so sometimes that language shift can be a big help. What I do want to point out, though, and this is the caveat, is that sometimes we can work so hard to inject all of this positivity in our day, and kind of identify the positive things and think positive thoughts. But then you end up with this situation, right? And I think of this comic frequently, right? And so on the left panel, you have this guy who's thinking through all of the positive things about himself. He's a great guy. He rocks. He's handsome. He's funny. And in there's one small piece that says you can be a jerk sometimes. And then he's eating dinner and he still has kind of all of these memories of these things that he was thinking earlier in the day. But the only one that's still a little bit more clearly present is you can be a jerk sometimes. And then as he goes to bed, the only thing that he can think is you can be a jerk sometimes. And what that means, and this happens to me, it happens to the best of us, is that no matter what we tell ourselves about being positive, about the day, about the future, we tend to have this nagging thought about ourselves, or about our child's future, or about where things are headed. And that is where we perseverate. That's where we spend the most time. And that's one good way to kind of just dampen your day very quickly, is just to perseverate on a really negative thought or feeling. So one of the great approaches that Coyne and colleagues shared in that article, and that is used commonly in acceptance and commitment therapy, is working to diffuse those negative thoughts that you have. And you might have a lot of those negative thoughts because you are handling so much, and you might not feel like you are the best parent you can be right now. You might feel that you're not the best employee that you can be right now. You're maybe not the best teacher, right? My fourth grader the other day said she was very angry with me because we were trying to do math together, and I was trying to explain to her, I think maybe triangles, right? Isosceles triangles versus scaling. And she finally just looked at me and she said, "What do you know about teaching me math?" She's like, "You have a PhD in working with kids with autism. You're not a teacher." And it was this moment where it doesn't matter. It does not matter who you are as a parent. It doesn't matter what your background is. This is not your training, unless it is your training. Maybe you are a teacher, but it's not my training, right? And so there are a lot of situations where we feel like we are failing. And here's an example, right? Where it's just like, I'm a horrible parent. You have those moments where everything goes wrong. And a lot of times this is because you're kind of moving away from a value that you have, right? That again, for me, that my kids feel safe and supported. And when we have a blow up argument about something, it moves so far away from my value, that I have feelings like this, right? I'm a horrible parent. And so the exercise that Coyne and colleagues shared is trying to figure out how to diffuse those and giving yourself more space between you and those thoughts that you have, because these thoughts are often heavy and painful to have. And so something that you can do is to think about that thought. And maybe right now while I'm talking, you think about a negative thought that you have about yourself and something that's happened recently. So just think about that thought. And then give yourself a little bit of space between you and that thought by saying, I'm having the thought that I'm a horrible parent. right? So now it's a thought, and you're labeling it as that. It is a thought that you're having, that you're a horrible parent. And then you can take it a step further and you can say, I'm noticing that I'm having the thought that I'm a horrible parent. And finally, you can say, I'm aware that I'm noticing that I'm having the thought that I'm a horrible parent. And as you add in those layers, and if you really move through this exercise, you can physically feel the distance between that thought and you. Because then it just becomes a thought and it's not a reflection on you. It's still something that carries pain, but it's a little bit more distance from you and just gives you a little bit more room to think about what comes next, right? And so the next step, after you've given yourself that space between you and that negative thought, is to just choose the next step to move towards your values. Okay, you've diffused the pain, the negative thought that you have, and you figure out, okay, what's the next right thing, right? If any of you have seen the movie Frozen 2, I'm pretty sure the entire soundtrack was written for COVID-19, because all of the songs are related to current time. But one of them is the character who is in a very sad situation where she's really grieving and can't see a way forward. And the whole song is about finding the next right thing. Just do the next right thing. And so when you're in those situations where you're feeling like there's no way out, you don't know what to do next, just do the next right thing. Give yourself that space, and move towards that value. So in addition to kind of these steps that you can take to change the way you're thinking throughout the day, to diffuse some of the thoughts that you have, to be more mindful during the course of the day, it is also going to be very helpful for you to connect with others. We do know from research that the amount of perceived support that parents have, and so not even necessarily the amount of support that they have, but the perceptions that they have of how much support they have in their lives is going to impact their well-being. So greater perceived support leads to increased well-being. And so it's going to be really important during COVID to identify your support sources. And again, this is one of those, like, how do I make the time for that things? Because certainly, trying to figure out how to chisel out time for a phone call feels very impossible. And I certainly want to recognize that I've had conversations with families, just at the DDVC where we are, reaching out and saying, how can we be helpful? How can we connect with you? Can we do a support group? What can we do that would be a way to connect? And I've had families come back and say, I can't stop moving all day because my child never stops moving all day. There's no way I can do a support group. And so really, I hear you, and I absolutely know that for a lot of families, finding that time to connect with others can be difficult. But I think it's also good to recognize that connecting with others does not need to be doing an hour-long social support group, or connecting for a 40-minute Zoom call, or having a conversation on the phone with a friend. A lot of meaningful connection can be found in shorter bouts of time, right? And fortunately, with today's technology, small things like texts to other people, from other people, can be enough to feel that connection, to feel that somebody's thinking of you, and to have feel that sense of support. And so figuring out kind of how to connect with others meaningfully, but something that fits within the time that you have, is going to be important. I think it's also good for us to reconsider social media and whether that is something that helps us connect with others meaningfully and provide us the support that we need, or whether it can be more detrimental. And sometimes I certainly feel this and see this, where there's a lot of comparison that can happen on social media, Facebook, all of these. And I already mentioned it, right, where I'm like, oh, these other families are taking their kids on hikes and I'm not doing that. And so if it is the case that social media is leaving you more often feeling like there is more that you should have done that you haven't done, and feeling more bad than good, then consider stepping back from it and giving yourself the time and the space to do something else and connecting with others more meaningfully. I've listed here a resource, Mom to Mom, which is out of Rutgers University's Behavioral Health Services. That's a phone line that you can call and be connected with another parent of a child with developmental disabilities. And so it could be a really nice way for you to kind of reach out if you need somebody, a peer, to connect with if you feel like you're kind of missing that connection with people who truly understand the experiences that you have during this time. That could be something that you use. I can't understate the importance of also reaching out to your child's team. And there are going to be families here who are working with a number of different teams, right? So maybe they have a home team, maybe they have a school team, and working with them to in a number of different ways. So the first point being that we know, again, from research, that a parent's sense of self-efficacy, the feeling that they have that they can handle what it is that they have right now, that they can work through it, will improve their own mental health. And so the you can get from your team about how to teach your child, about how to manage challenging behavior, about how to fit what it is that you're trying to do in both of those areas into your everyday routine. That sense of self-efficacy that you get as you learn those skills, that alone is going to help improve mental health and decrease your stress. I think it's also really necessary for families to recognize and convey their own limits in these teams. And I think that that has kind of happened naturally in a lot of teams over time, and I'm hopeful that it's happened in yours as well, that there are going to be situations where maybe teams, whether your child's teacher or some other professional who's working with your child, is asking more of you than you think you can give. And you need to be vocal and share that so that you have the opportunity to then problem solve with them about how you might be able to change it and how things might be able to look different. And so some of those, a way that some of that might look, for example, is if you have a team member who's suggesting that you take data on your child's behavior during the day, and the behavior that they're asking you to do is something that feels unmanageable. And so talking to them about how you might be able to modify those data so that they're easier to take. Maybe they're not as precise. Maybe they don't give them all the information they want, but they give them enough information for them to be able to go on, right? Or if they're offering a strategy for managing challenging behavior or for teaching your child that feels like it's not something that's easily implemented, talk with them about it so you can problem solve how to adjust and adapt to this current situation, because all teams really need to recognize that what it is that parents are experiencing right now is very unusual, and putting any of these treatments and services in place solely in the home ways. And if you do not have a team that you're working with, or if you need a little bit of extra support in addition to the team that you're working with, these can be ways that you might be able to get access. And so the first is the Rutgers Graduate School of Applied and Professional Psychology's Autism Support Network. And this is remote online health support, mental health support that's provided for children with autism, but also their families. And so it might be the case that you need a little bit of extra help managing challenge behavior that's happening at home, or maybe you want to get that toilet training under control. Maybe you want to help set up a predictable schedule. Again, if you don't have a team that you're working with and you need that support, then you could reach out to our services and we would have a behavior analyst who would be able to help you with that. But then also, if you're a parent who feels like you need a little bit of extra help working through some of what I've shared here, then we have clinical psychologists and clinical psychologists in training who would be able to work with you on these skills as well and just provide you an extra boost. So again, it's free, it's short term, but it could be something that's very helpful. I've worked with my team of graduate students, and I'm very grateful to them, to help identify resources that would be helpful for our students at the DDDC. And so they've compiled a list of different resources for parents, for siblings, activities for children with autism that might be helpful for the students that we have, but they're available on our website and can be accessed by anybody. And so if you navigate to that website, then there might be some things there that you'd find. And many of them will also help you with some of the strategies that I've talked about here with relating to mindfulness and social support and those sorts of things. And then finally, I mentioned this newsletter earlier, but Rutgers Center for Adult Autism Services during this time has developed a newsletter specifically for adults with autism and their caregivers. And there are a number of issues out at this point. You can find those on their website, but you can also subscribe to their newsletter so that you get their information directly into your box. And I'm hopeful that some of these resources will be helpful. I do also want to say, and these are emergency resources that are not going to be needed by everybody, but if you have family members, if you're working with family members, maybe some of your children or a family friend, anybody who kind of needs extra support during this time. These are two very important resources that I want to make sure that everybody has. So one is the New Jersey Crisis Mobilization Team for families who are actively in crisis, who need to help keep their family safe. And then the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline is here as well. Again, for families who really feel like they're out of options. And I really want to make sure that I share that information as well. But I'm very hopeful that some of these resources here, so related to mindfulness, finding time for yourself, working to kind of reframe how you're thinking about things, but also making sure that you're reaching out, that you have your team, that you have your support with friends and family is going to go a long way. And I know that we have a long way to go still with this, and it definitely feels like that as we move into the extended school year and what next year looks like. But hopefully, you're able to kind of identify some resources that are helpful for you and a team that can work with you to make this a successful time as possible. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kate. I'm not a parent, but I am going to practice all of those things, because whether you're a parent or not, you still need to have that mindfulness, which I think is really important. I don't know if anybody wants to ask a few questions. I would just preface that by saying not to make it too specific, but more broad, because Kate can't, of course, give specific advice about circumstances, but maybe broadly about any issues you might have with regards to the stress that you might experience in resources or recommendations about how to access some of those resources. So does anybody have any questions? You can unmute yourself. You're getting a lot of thank yous.
Oh, good.
A lot of shout outs, which is nice. Anybody? Oh, we have a chat box here. Lots of things. Great presentations. Thank you. Thank you. Great, 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 great. One question I had was, what if despite all of these exercises, families are still feeling stressed? Like, what is the point at which they should seek additional counseling? Like, is there a point? I think we as professionals struggle with when to make that referral for a family. When do we know that the family's reached a breaking point, or even in ourselves, that they should kind of seek professional help beyond these exercises?
Right. I think it becomes more of a challenge now during this time, because I would say, when you're really feeling overwhelmed and that the negative feelings that you're experiencing really far outweigh kind of the positive feelings that you have during the day. But I think that that's a little bit of a challenge right now, because this is an extraordinarily difficult time. And I think that families are going to struggle with having more negative feelings than positive feelings right now. But if you really feel like it's impacting your ability to move through your day and to provide care and, to kind of have the motivation to do what it is that you need to do to care for yourself and to care for your child, I think that's a really important time. And I think it's also important for others to recognize that in their partners or in their family members, because sometimes when somebody gets to that point, it's really difficult for them to be able to know what to do next. And so getting that help can be a good thing. And that might be reaching out to, the short-term services that I was talking about. And the thing is that even if you're not at that point, right, where you don't even feel like you can kind of, get out of bed in the morning, even if you're just feeling like, I don't know how to handle these emotions, and kind of all of the grief or anger or resentment, whatever it is that you're feeling, the short-term services are so non-committal at this point, just in terms of being able to reach out and get somebody else's perspective and a few thoughts about where to head from here, I think could go a long way. And then, if it seemed like what you needed was beyond that, what they were able to provide, then that would be time to reach out to a professional who could provide regular therapy and more intensive therapy. That's a really good question.
And I think sometimes our families, because they're so high functioning in so many ways, they're always doing, and they're, they have so many resources in that, sometimes I'm reminding families sometimes it's okay to just not work with your child right now. It's like you can take a break.
Yes.
And I think sometimes families have trouble giving themselves permission to take a break, to take a day off.
Exactly.
And not be on that treadmill of go.
And I think that is, and that's why it was so important for me to say that, because I think it's one of the hardest things that I think most parents have trouble doing, is just giving themselves permission to give themselves that time, even the 10 minutes of time, right? But you're right, giving a day off, and there have certainly been times where I'm just, I said to my kids, it's like, okay, you know what, today's a freebie day. We just do what it is that you need to do. I'll do what it is I need to do. And we're not doing kind of like the schooling and the running around and all of these different meetings that need to happen, because everybody needs a little bit of that space, kids included. So
important.
That's a good point.
Any questions? You can chat them in the box. Everybody's just saying thank you. Well, I don't want to keep you. I do want to thank everybody for joining. We had quite a nice crowd here. This will be available. We've recorded it. It will be available through our social media. So make sure those of you who know people who weren't able to log on or weren't able to attend, feel free to let them know about the recording, and Kate will have access to it. But I just want to thank you for the work you're doing, Kate. It's so important. Not too many people are speaking about these issues, and I think that the mental health of the families that we work with, it's just so important. It's that other half of the picture, and families really need to feel the support. They need the training, but they need the support, and they need they need the permission to be able to feel what they're feeling, and then be able to access the resources to get the help that they need.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think that, again, being able to point that out in the beginning, it's like, look at this list of everything that you're doing, right? Look at how much you're carrying right now. And telling practitioners, again, look how much we're all carrying, right? And being able to kind of take that perspective and recognize the steps that we need to take to help everybody cope is going to be really important. So hopefully some of these steps were things that people will be able to use.
Yes, very much so, I'm sure. All right, well, thank you so much. This woman said, I'm a single mom with an autistic child. Thank you. I really appreciate the resources. So that's great. So, well, thank you. We're going to sign off now. Thank you, Kate. And I'll make sure that I get the recording to you. Okay.
Sounds good. Thanks.
Take care. Bye-bye.